what effects should we see from Anavar? Okay, so realistically, Anavar is going to help you build muscle. That's the effect I would say you should hope to see. It's something that, frankly, I think it's oftentimes used in a place where muscle growth isn't really likely to occur, given that it's often used in the competition setting or in a steep fat loss setting. Just because it's used that way doesn't mean that it's the best use for it. And I would say more often than not, people are sleeping on the biggest benefits that it can offer. It's an anabolic. So, I mean, any kind of anabolic, it's going to be best utilized in order to build muscle. Yes, it's going to offset protein catabolism, so it's going to offer anti-catabolic properties, obviously, but is that the best use for it? Is that the thing you should expect to see? Is that the thing that you're going to write home about? I mean, like, I think it's really poor use for it, personally. Sure, Anavar does work in certain pathways that are related to fat loss, but again, is that where it shines? Is that the best use for it? No, not really. And if you're a female athlete, if you're someone who's like, I'm not looking to be like a top Olympian, I'm not looking to be like a competitive physique athlete, I just want to put on some muscle in the right areas so that I feel a little more complete. Well, yeah, an anabolic is going to expedite that process. In terms of the actual effects, like what can you expect to see from it? Well, it depends. Depends how well you are doing all the basics in terms of driving muscle growth. Are you creating an environment that is conducive with growing? So basic things. I mean, you got to have your nutrition in check. And I mean, I hate that it sounds so abstract and ambiguous, but essentially if we're looking at gaining a pound a week, which is like pretty aggressive, it's a 500 calorie surplus a day. So if we're wanting to half that, okay, half a pound a week, that's pretty reasonable. Some would still argue maybe a little too aggressive because, I mean, realistically, how much of that is muscle? How much of that is body fat? When you consider that, and you consider that that's just a 250 calorie surplus, so 250 calories above your maintenance, that's where you have to really be honest with yourself, and you need to kind of move through your growth phase with integrity around how accurate is your food reporting. Are you having meals that ultimately make it to where maybe global adherence is not as tight as it should be? And that's if you're someone who's like, hey, I'm trying to minimize the amount of body fat gain that I incur as I go through the growth phase. But if that's the case, I mean, like we're talking about like putting this in place to expedite muscle growth. Well, yeah, like you need to be in a surplus. Do you need to be in an excessive surplus? Is it going to be much harder for you to grow with an anabolic as opposed to not having an anabolic in place, as opposed to naturally? No, it's going to be easier. So I would say even that particularly being said, if you have the anabolic in place, your food needs to be even more tightly controlled for the fact that like you can get away with really mitigating that unnecessary fat gain. In terms of how much you're looking to build, I mean, that's really going to come down to your history, your training history. How much of your natural potential have you maxed out? Are you on a program right now that's resulting in muscle growth? And if so, what is that rate of change? I think it's really important to ensure that if you're going to be putting the anabolic, that you are seeing a positive trend in weight gain and that the weight that's coming on is of high quality, meaning more muscle relative to fat. But if that's the case, I would kind of say like, well, what is the point of the anabolic? And if you're still seeing progress, why put the anabolic in place? I mean, I get it in the case that you're someone who's like, I'm trying to expedite that process. I'm trying to get even more out of it. But realistically, I mean, you put it in place. The longest you really should have it in place is like 8-ish weeks. Some people are going to be short of that. Some people are going to go a little longer. How much muscle can you realistically expect to build during that time? And this is even more pressing of a question if you're an athlete who is already trained, if you already have a lot of muscle tissue, if you're on a really sound program and you've kind of pulled all of your levers in terms of, periodizing your training to incur the necessary stimulus to create those adaptations. All in all, I mean, like you still need to do these things, but the actual rate of change that you can expect even with doing everything correct, is going to largely depend on your runway as an individual. What is the difference in where you currently are as opposed to the amount of muscle, like the max capacity that you should carry on your frame? So hard to answer. I think I avoided answering that almost entirely. So blanketly, what I'll say, it's best use, what you should expect, the effect that you should hope to get from it is to build muscle.